conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Big weekend, Huskers versus Jays.
Oh, no.
Who you got, Jess? I'm going for the Huskers.
Absolutely not.
All right, next week.
I'm
we should make a bet.
I'm Creighton all the way.
What are we talking about?
Basketball.
Oh, basketball. Okay.
Are we a red state or a blue state? And this has nothing to do with politics, everyone. Just Huskers or Jays.
Yes.
Oh.
Huskers versus the Blue Jays.
We should make a
100%.
friendly wager.
All right.
So next week, I'll bring one of those printed things. If the Huskers win, you got to wear it, and if the Jays win, I'll rock it.
Okay, I'll bring mine. Do you have a Creighton one?
Yeah, I do.
All right.
I do. So we'll bring it. Friendly little wager.
Okay. I'll just be here to make sure you follow through.
Thanks.
Eric, you want to get in on this?
Who do you think? Who are you going to root for?
That's true. You're our tiebreaker.
I don't follow college
You're the
basketball.
tiebreaker between these things.
I don't know. I really have no idea. I would have no clue. Who's better right now.
One of the teams has the longest win streak in the nation, and the other team, they're figuring it out.
Is McDermott still there?
Coaching, yes.
Yeah, he's still.
His son is not there anymore.
No, his coach. He's still coaching. Okay.
McDermott versus Fred Hoiberg, two former Iowa State coaches battling it out.
Oh, I'll go with the Jays just to be fun. I'll stay with the blue. But I don't know. Do I have to wear something? Because I don't know. It doesn't matter to me.
I can bring him.
I think I have a Husker sweatshirt I could wear. Does that mean I wear that if the
So we're going to be
Jays
Huskers
lose?
Jays either way next week.
But I don't have any Blue Jays stuff. Is it the
We'll
Blue
figure it
Jays?
out.
Blue Jays. And for the record, I always root for the Jays, except this one time of the year. I want Nebraska, the state of Nebraska basketball. I just want them to do good.
We can continue to sit next to each other.
Yeah,
All
for
right.
sure.
I'm gonna forget this, but
We'll remember.
anyways, I heard we had a voicemail. Is that still in the cards?
We do.
Let's listen to.
Maybe
a
it's
voice.
one of the coaches from one of those teams.
I'm sure they called in.
Let's
Big
see.
fans of the show.
Hello. Yes, after hearing Brian Recker's uncomfortable conversation, he mentioned church hurt. And so I had a question. Is church hurt? Brian Recker made it sound like this was a big issue, and maybe it'd be a good thing to discuss. Is it church hurt today a significant issue as Brian had indicated? And if so, what can Bible-believing churches do to prevent hurting of people so that the Jesus Christ is not impacted? I'd appreciate it to hear your thoughts on it, because all of you have a diverse set of backgrounds, and want to hear what about the subject of church hurt. Thank you.
I don't know why. No matter how many times we test this,
Once we go
It's
live,
okay.
it skips out there a little bit. So sorry for the audio issues, but I think we got the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
Church hurt. Is it real today? Is it a big deal? What do you guys think? I feel like this could be an entire episode on its own. So I don't know how much we'll be able to actually dissect the subject, but
yeah, I don't think we would do justice.
Agreed.
Trying to totally.
I do think it's a
dissect
thoughtful question, though.
Yeah, I think it's a really thoughtful question. And in lieu of it following, Brian, I think Brian did have and indicated a lot of, church hurt that people have. And I would 100% say, yes, church hurt is a real thing. I think where it's tough is I think there's institutional church hurt, where because of an institution, when we're talking about the church in that way, when we're using it, language for it's a building and it's, a specific church, I think there's that reality. And then there's the broader term, like the family of God church. And I think you can kind of get hurt by both of those. And it's being unearthed more and more. I think obviously the most obvious places are just in abuse, that's happened, scandals that have wrecked hearts and lives, and the wake of all that stuff. I think even the kind of series we did talking about shiny happy people was really, that wasn't a quote unquote church, but it was organizational, kind of church hurt from parachurch ministry. So, I mean, I think it's real. It's definitely trending now. People feel more willing to talk about it. No doubt about that. But yeah, I think it's real. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think too, we are in more of a place as a society where we're creating safe places for people to talk about it. And there is documentaries, there are forums where people can discuss it. And so there's more attention on it so that we can see it. And then we can see how broad that it is. Because I agree, Alex, it's in the institution. And then we also notice how, hey, my family was going through a divorce and I went to the church for help. And this is how they handled it. Or I reported this abuse and I didn't know what to do, and this is what I was told. Like, there is so many different facets of church hurt and ways that people are hurt and processing, and I think we have more avenues of hearing that. And so do I think it still happens today? Yes. I think that the church, as far as I've seen in the last 10 years in my experience, is taking steps towards being curious and growth. And so I feel like I see good steps in a lot of areas. I'm not trying to say to the church as a whole, because it's there are issues and there are people that don't do that, and so I don't want to take away from that, but I think that the church is taking steps to explore that and to listen, but I do think it's still active, and I think we're in the stage of processing it. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, it's complicated. I think it just depends on what people are talking about when it comes to church hurt. I think there are different kinds of it. Alex, you kind of hinted at it. If it's abuse, that's one thing that should be taken very seriously. I think sometimes people are also driven to churches because they feel like maybe they have a place to express themselves in different ways, whether that's through volunteer work or whatever it might be. And sometimes when things don't work out the way they think they should, people will claim that's a form of church hurt. Maybe they didn't get the volunteer role they thought they should have, or get to sing the song that they wanted to sing, or start the program that they wanted to start. And sometimes, I mean, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I think ultimately it's a lot about what you do with it. Because I think a lot of us, as one form or another, have been hurt by the church at some point in our lives. And obviously the church is made up of God's people, so we're flawed, and we're going to do the wrong thing sometimes, or say the wrong things, or not consider people's circumstances well, and we just have to have grace. So I'm not trying to excuse when people are in abusive situations, because that's different, but I think that's more rare. I think I was trying to think back to when we had I think it was Josh Turek on about he was, he's in a wheelchair and he was in won Olympic gold medals and things like that. But he talked about kind of some of his church hurt when people would always try to pray for him to be healed. Every time he came to church, and it's eventually that gets to be kind of it's not, people's hearts are in the right place, but they don't think about, okay, yeah, this guy's experiencing this at every church he attends, because people are thinking they're going to make a difference, and how that makes a person feel singled out, or even can make people feel like God isn't at work in their lives. And then that starts to lead to all sorts of other types of judgment, that is probably not true. How are you living your life? Or is your prayer life good, or whatever? These are all these reasons why you're not being healed. So that can lead to church hurt. I mean, I think it's very real, but I do think it's at the end of the day, what do you do with it? Are you in a faith community where people are owning up to that when they make mistakes, and they're holding themselves accountable, and they're apologizing when it's necessary? And are you accepting those apologies earnestly? Because I think a lot of times people will get hurt, use that as an excuse to jump to the next church just because they want to change. Life gets boring sometimes. Routine gets stale, and people look for excuses to move on, or they don't want the accountability in their life anymore, and it's a great excuse to not be accountable to a church and say, oh, they hurt me and now I can go do my own thing, and if someone asks, I can just say I've got church hurt. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think just as a snippet, because I think he asked what can a Bible believing church do to I think, protect itself from it. And I think accountability is one of those things. Like for leadership, I think humility from leadership, because a lot of times, unfortunately, it's the leadership. I mean, you've got Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcasts like that are unearthing it outside of shiny, happy people and those things. And I think when you have humble leaders that are submitted to an elder board, governing board, whatever kind of leadership, and people are willing to have real conversations. I mean, when you get in positions where people are just yes men and yes women, and they're just one person's able to kind of mow over everybody and manipulate them, and we excuse dogma. I think a lot of times where church hurt happens is you have a very charismatic, great leader, and a lot of good things are happening.
Yeah.
And so people will excuse, well, there's so much good stuff happening here. Yeah, there's a few, dead bodies around here, a few people that are hurt, but look at the overall scope of all the good things that God is doing. And when we overassign credit to humans for what God is doing in a church, and that's one of the things I loved about the conversation I had a couple weeks ago with, what is his name that came for our healing and freedom services?
Ron Wolburn.
Ron Wolburn. Was even that idea of, hey, there's healing people that are really, really gifted at healing, and then we overemphasize, hey, that it's a person that's doing the healing versus it's Jesus doing the healing. Then that leads to a lot of, I think, pain, manipulation, people ultimately painting themselves as God and taking the focus off of God. And so I think that's a big thing. And leaders that are willing to say, I could be wrong, even when it's talking about using God's word and we're dissecting God's word. Man, I really, really am convicted, and I believe this with a huge passion, but there's just spaces that the Bible isn't clear, and I could be wrong. And I think those are some of the just simple things I think a church can do in leadership. But yeah, I think something we should dissect more in the future for sure.
All right. That's our take on church hurt, but today we're going to be talking about breaking generational cycles without overreacting, or overcorrecting, I should say. This is something, Jess, that you had been talking to us about, and it's something that has come up recently in your life where you've had conversations with people about this, and I think it's really interesting because I think when we're talking about generational cycles, it can mean a lot of different things. I mean, I know when I was growing up in a very charismatic church, they spoke generational curses a lot, and that was one way. I think that was at least the nomenclature for those communities to talk about why. Oh, okay, Grandpa's alcoholism went on to Dad's alcoholism, went on to the son's alcoholism, and those types of things. And now that there's more science behind it, it's showing that there actually is imprints that are happening on our DNA, and this stuff can be carried down. And then so to look at it and how can we correct it, but also kind of addressing the question of how do we have these conversations, identify the problem, and then not overcorrect. So do you have anything to add to that, Jess?
I just think that this is a really tender subject. I think it affects even each one of us as we talk about it in our own ways because of things that our families have gone through. So anybody that's listening is going to maybe read more or less into what we're saying. And so we're just acknowledging that it's very tender, that each family has their own generational cycles, and we are all dealing with this in different ways. And so I think that that's a good place for me to start with it. This has kind of been something that I have been just internally processing, and then just recently I feel like I can use the word became brave enough to say at a recent family function that we had, just to name that, hey, I'm seeing these patterns in our family, and how can we be committed to identifying it and talking about that. And so I don't know if you want me to talk more about that later, but I just think that that's a good place to start, and we all have them in some way, good, bad, that we need to process through, and then we can overcorrect.
Well, and I think also just what it means. Like sometimes it's habits that you pick up because you are under the parental guidance of someone or guardianship of someone, and they have these habits and you kind of pick them up, or maybe they're generational. I mean, what are some examples that you guys have in your own life that comes to mind? I mean, I was trying to think of some myself. I think with me, I know there will be just random things that'll come up, and my wife will just kind of be like, "You're acting like your dad right now. What are you doing? Like, why are you doing that thing?" Or why are you, and it's just, sometimes it's the way I lean at a counter, or the way I sit in a chair, or the way I cross my legs. It's just certain things that you don't even realize. And it's like, is that the DNA, or is that just I grew up around him so much that I picked up those mannerisms? That's not really a generational cycle, but I think it's kind of a loose example of how we are products, or at least byproducts of our surroundings and our family.
I think though that's a good point of just like, there are some things that are kind of habitual that, good or bad, like they are passed down through generations. So like an example of maybe like a more lighthearted one would be my dad's family throughout the generations has been Catholic. And so they've always said the same prayers over and over again, like before they eat. And so in my family, we were Christian. So my dad left the Catholic church and moved to Protestant, but we still prayed every day, like the exact same Christian prayer.
Yeah.
And so out of that, right, it was a good thing. Like it's kind of habitual that happened, that got passed down, but it was something where it leaves an imprint of like, okay, so should I do that in my family? Am I doing it right or wrong? If I don't, am I leaving tradition? And so that's maybe like a little bit more easy one to say.
Yeah, I think overall, all of our lives, whether we realize it or not, are patterned. One of the things I do anytime I work with a couple before they get married, we work through some conversations and books, and one of the things I invite them to do is a genogram, which is essentially looking at patterns in your life. And these patterns can be anything. It can be, hey, how did money work inside of your family? Who was the spender? Who was the saver? It could be discipline. It can be religion. It can be so many different things. Is divorce a pattern inside of your family, or my family? Is death by suicide a family? A pattern in your family. So I think it's always healthy, especially when there's two families merging, to be able to look at, hey, what are patterns? Even cancer. I mean, you go to a doctor, and a lot of times they're going to ask for your family history, because when you know your family history, it at least gives you a starting point to start to look at and say, hey, maybe this is something that's a part of it. And so some of those patterns are, winning patterns. They're really good. They're things that you've inherited, and it's really good. And some of those things will set you up, to be less successful, but you don't really know what those patterns are until you look back. And I think that's usually one of those aha moments, is people don't realize, the heritage and legacy that they're bringing into a family, and how deep that can go, how that can go back generations, or that can spread. You're like, hey, my family, quote unquote, is normal. But then you look at all your aunts and uncles and you're like, okay, well, this is a cycle inside of my family in one way or another. And so I think it's important to have some of those conversations. And then that's where we can get into, okay, where do I embrace those, or where do I start to overreact, to overcorrect, what some of those things are? Because you're not going to be able to focus on every single one of those things that you bring in to a marriage, or not everyone's going to be identified as unhealthy. So where do I identify unhealthy ones? And when I start new patterns in my family, how are we going to do that? And I think one of the most difficult things is, how do you start to have those conversations even with your families, when they're like, no, I mean, for example, we're in the holiday season, right? Yeah. So I don't care. No matter what, we always went to your dad's house, your grandpa's house for Thanksgiving every year, and we went to grandma's for Thanksgiving. Well, now you're like, well, we're not going to do that. And that's not a real life example for me in my life, but you hear those things happening over and over. And so unless you have those conversations, sometimes with trepidation to your parents or your in-laws, then that can be some of the most awkward stuff, because they feel rejected.
Yeah.
And they feel like, well, I'm rejecting you because we're starting a new pattern. You're like, I'm not saying that was a bad pattern, but hey, in our life, in our family, when we're starting things, we're just going to do things differently. And so having those conversations, I think, is a part of the correction process or starting new patterns too.
Well, and I think people, some of these things can be so dark, whether maybe it's like sexual addiction or alcoholism or addiction in general or other types of abuse, that it doesn't get talked about. So someone might start to struggle with something and wonder why they're even struggling with it, not realizing that, this could be generational. Maybe there is something that your family has some skeletons in the closet, and you're wondering why you're taking on these certain attributes and you're not sure. But I also think it could be something like, did you grow up in a household where your parents yelled a lot, or that was their disciplinary action was to scream at you, or were you spanked, because I think, I grew up in a household where I got spanked with all sorts of things, whether it was a belt or a piece of a toy train track or a yardstick or whatever. And, as I started raising kids, that was kind of what I thought I was supposed to do, right? Like, oh, I'm supposed to discipline them that way. And it didn't take very long for me to just like feel so conflicted about that. Like, I was never very aggressive with it, but a couple swats here and there on the rear end, and you just start to go, this doesn't feel right. I don't know what that is. I'm not here to cast judgment on people who think that's the right way to correct a child, but I think you have to face that at some point and go, just because this is the way I was raised, was it actually effective? When I think back to the complete terror and fear I had of my parents when I was being spanked, do I want my children to fear me that way? And like, when that starts to break my heart, I just couldn't do it. And I think there are different ways of disciplining a child, but or the screaming, sometimes you get yelled at or whatever. You just start to realize that those things were so hurtful and harmful, and it didn't help build trust with a parental figure, that it's like, okay, I think that's okay for me to put this aside. And even though sometimes you'll feel that pressure from maybe family or friends who are still believe a certain way, like, oh, this is the right thing, you're doing the wrong thing. Spare the rod, spoil the child. You might get some of that stuff, and you realize that it just isn't. It doesn't have to be that way, right? Something can stop with you, and I think that if my grandchildren don't have that type of disciplinary action taken on them, I think all the better for it. But I don't know, in that same sense, though, I think one example that I've heard of is someone who did get raised in a household where there was a lot of screaming and yelling. They come out of that, and then the way they maybe raise their families, they just don't talk about anything. They don't engage in their emotions very well, because it's like, well, that was bad. I didn't like that. And I think that's an example of overcorrection. So as we dive into that, what are some other examples, or what does that mean to everyone at the table?
I think if we're talking about like specifically yelling or just anything that we notice, a lot of times we can notice it's a cycle that we want to break if we make a vow to ourselves at some point in our lives where we say the words, I will never, to my kids or to my spouse, or I will never do this when I'm an adult. That's a good way to notice maybe some dysfunction or some patterns that are happening in your family, where it's like, I think that's always like the first clue of like, this is something that I want to break, and I can feel hopeful because like I have this conviction. But I think that there's a lot of ways that can look as we're processing through it. So that could look like, I'm not going to yell at my kids. Maybe that's the correction. Or if somebody else yells at my kids, I'm going to become the person that I didn't have when I was getting yelled at, and I'm going to take you down. Like it's very triggering in that. But I think that we can, so it can be, I'm never going to yell at my kids, and I'm always going to I'll figure out another way to deal with it, but I'm not going to raise my voice. That's just my thing I'm going to do. Or if somebody does, they are going to get shut down because nobody's going to talk to them. And if they get in trouble at school and a teacher says something to them, I'm gonna like it's the overcorrection can come when we start saying like, okay, this isn't gonna happen, and then the trail can go on.
Yeah, and I think overall that desire, I love what you said there, Jess, like when we say I will never, usually that's birthed out of like a place of, no, there was pain there that caused pain in my life. And I never want like you were saying, Eric, as well. Like, I don't want my kids to have to experience that. I don't want my kids to fear their dad, you know? But when we make like those I will never statements, it's kind of like the person that, you know, has way too much to drink and they're like, God, I'll never make this mistake again. You know, like, God, if you just help me feel better right now or do that, you know, we make these deals with God, and sometimes we make these deals with ourselves, and then it fails to eliminate being gracious, you know, in our own lives. I mean, when that's a pattern that's happened over and over in your life, getting out of a pattern that's, you know, formed over 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years, it doesn't just happen in, you know, with the snap of a finger. Can God break those cycles? I think, yeah, he can, but often that's not how it happens. And so then you're not affording yourself any kind of grace when you do those types of things. And so I think you can make promises that, man, I don't want to do this. And I think that's where you invite a spouse or somebody else to say, hey, when I'm seeming to do this, I need your help in a gracious way to help correct me. But I think what happens if you never make that and you just kind of make those vows to yourself, then shame starts to come in when you do it. And then it actually becomes this defeatist mindset when you start to do it. You're like, I'll never overcome it. I'm just, you're right. I am the same person as my dad, or you're right. I'm always going to be this or that. I think when addiction, you know, happens and you're not, that's why AA is such a powerful thing, having accountability and doing all these steps along the way, not just saying, hey, addiction just breaks like that.
Yeah.
And so when we do that to ourselves, when we're not offering ourselves the ability to have grace, and when we're overcorrecting, then I think what it actually does is it creates a bigger problem. You maybe become even more angry because now you're angry at yourself, and you want to take that out somewhere else, if that's yelling or anger is a part of the issue. And so I think making statements like that are just super black and white, I will never, actually rarely do I see them being fruitful in my life, but in others as well.
And I would say, I mean, it's the joke of, oh, there's no handbook for parenting or something like that. You know, it's true. And I think a lot of times as a parent, myself included, I would include myself, I should say, in this analogy. But I think you all of a sudden you have this child and you really don't know what's next. Like, you have a lot of different people in your life that might tell you how to raise them, or you might have your own idea, or you might have read a book, or you might, you know, whatever that might be. But I think, the decisions you make are could potentially last generations. And so it's like, when you think about it with that weight, it feels like a lot, but in the moment when that kid's like misbehaving or out of control and you don't know what to do, it's really stressful because there's no book, there's no guidance, right? You got to figure out some way to get the situation under control. And like, if that forms a habit, or if some sort of negative discipline occurs in that moment that in your mind equates to something that works, and then you start to repeat that, and then you form this negative habit that you don't even think could be something that you're creating a generational, a negative generational consequence. But I don't know. I think that's the stuff that's tough, because then even as like I've experienced as my kids get older, like when I was young, I had a terrible temper. I don't know exactly where I got it from, but usually only the people closest to me got to experience it, you know? And so even through marriage, I would say, you know, Christina, she was the only one that would probably see that temper a lot of times, because I was probably too ashamed to let anyone else see it. And then as my kids got older, it's like, okay, now when they're exposed to that, when that flares up or whatever, now I'm seeing it through their eyes in a different way. And it's like those things, I think, like you were kind of hinting at this, Alex. I think that's what puts a mirror in front of you sometimes. And you kind of have to make a decision. Am I going to work to better myself? And like, am I going to seek God's guidance in this, seek wisdom of people around me? Am I going to try to make a change? Or am I going to go, it's too late. I'm just this way. This is who I am. And I already have all this guilt and shame for the way I've acted in the past, and changing today, that's not going to change what I've already done. And that's just a really tough situation to be in, but it is something that, like, I know for myself, I've had to learn and go, okay, I would rather my kids and my wife and my family see that I'm capable of change. And that even, like, that's such the beautiful part of Christianity and our faith is for people to see and experience what God's change can look like in your life. And I don't know, it's tough, because I do think when you feel overwhelmed or you do feel shame, those decisions to make a change sometimes can't be done on your own. But I do think it has to start with you to a certain extent.
I think one of the things we haven't discussed yet is just maybe some of the harms of overcorrecting. Like, I think of, a typical, the American dream, right? Somebody shows up as an immigrant, or they come from nothing and they pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And a lot of times that person will vow, I will never make my kid have to live through this. Like, and so we've talked about this in a lot of different ways. Even one of the books, Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt wrote a book before that called Coddling the American Mind. And one of the premises of coddling the American mind, and he talks about this in Anxious Generation, is that reality of, like, just free play. So a lot of parents that grew up in this world where everything's dangerous, nothing's safe, we become these helicopter parents, and we don't let our kids go out and play. They don't know their neighbors. We don't let our kids ride their bikes, down the street and come home when the street lights are on, because we have so much fear, and that eliminates this play-based childhood. And then we are not actually helping our kids develop resilience inside of our lives. And so sometimes that happens through, well, my kid's never going to have to wear Walmart shoes, I grew up wearing Walmart shoes all the time. So I even made, like, decisions in my own life. Like, my kid's he's never going to Payless. Just silly things like that. But then I look back and I'm like, but how much resilience was I able to build? How much self-confidence was I able to build in my own life because of some of the struggle, right? And so there's that balance of not wanting to over coddle, because all of us want to create an optimal environment for our kids, for our families, for people to grow up in. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think that's where that balance becomes difficult. Where do I create opportunities that I never had and is giving my kid a leg up that I never had, but also where am I doing that's not actually giving them ability to develop resilience? Where am I not actually teaching them how to fail inside of my house, giving them permission to fail, to fall out of the tree, to do all of those types of things? And so I'm actually robbing them by overworking or by taking care of all their needs. I'm actually robbing their ability to be independent because I've raised a dependent kid, and eventually your kids have to leave the house and become independent. And so I think that's one of the ways that sometimes that flushes out is in the money conversation and being able to make my kids be able to have the nice brands and do all these things, not have to, like, I didn't have college paid for. Neither of my parents graduated from college. And so therefore they didn't even think about student loans. And so they didn't have money saved up for us to go to college. And so Aaron and I are like, all right, one of the things we're going to do is have a savings account because we want our kids to have something to go to college. And that's not a blame my parents thing, but it's like, okay, how are we setting them up? But I also am like, man, I learned a lot of lessons about money by paying back student loans and through that struggle. So I think that's where that balance of overcorrection plays out a little bit in my life as I think about it.
Yeah.
I'll say that here, like where this thought for me kind of was birthed out of is that, being a therapist, I look a lot at family systems. Like when someone's in my office, like it's just more, it's really natural for me to be like, well, how does that family function? And what did your parents do? What did your grandparents do? And that kind of has transferred into my own life of like, what are the hurts that I experience and how far back have they gone? And so one pattern that has been really hurtful in my generation and to me is looking back the past 4 generations, there's a conflict that happens, different conflicts, and then the relationship breaks. So there's like silence, like we cut that person off. We don't do the work. We don't talk to them. Even with some people, like I don't know what the problem is. I just know like, oh, we don't talk to those people, or these people aren't in our lives anymore. And this is a pattern that I've seen. I believe it's a spirit of like, it feels so spiritual to me because of how it has affected me and affected relationships. And it's like the enemy loves for sin to get into a family, to break up the family system, and the way that correction happens. So maybe someone says like, hey, you did this to me, this happened, I'm done with you. Well, with kids, that is really difficult to build resilience, and it causes a lot of stress. So for me, I just remember being like really stressed and confused as a kid because I didn't understand that. Maybe that was best for those people, but that overcorrection, maybe for one person, it affects a whole family system. And I think that that's where we see it as it goes down. So then it comes to my generation, and I'm like, man, I'm sick of this. Like, I'm so tired of like this happening in families, and for us to not be able to work through conflict. And so it's almost asking yourself, like, if I see a pattern, like, it's not what can they do? It's like, man, what could I do? And so for me, I think seeing that overcorrection and how it's just like the cutoff is so hard to manage and to explain to a family. And so I think those are the types of also dysfunction that are, I think, very real for a lot of families. And so then it's like this conversation I was terrified to have with my siblings that still get together. And it took like I said, this is something that I'm working on, that I'm noticing. This is hard for me to bring up and talk about, but I'm committed to this. Like, me as a person, like, this is what I see. Like, I struggle with this, and I'm committed to this. Yeah. Can we be committed together? Like, if something happens and I hurt you, I want to know. Like, I want to talk about it because I want my kids to know your kids. I want to spend time with your family. And that was hard for me to say. Mm-hmm. It took like everything in me because my family doesn't communicate. And I think a lot of families tend to not communicate around these types of things that we're trying to avoid or not do anymore. And we want to protect our family. That comes from a good place of like, most of the time I don't think that it's always out of a bad place. It's like, I want to protect my peace or do something different. But I think one of the ways to break that in a healthy way is to have that conversation. And you know what? I've been thinking about this for 5 years. So it's like, you may have to sit in the waiting, and you may have to sit in the valley of it and walk with God with it for a long time before you have that moment. And I don't even know if people will have the moment. Like, I took it and I was terrified, and I could have been shut down, and it was kind of like half and half, because I think it was kind of like, what? Mm-hmm. We don't talk about like that. Yeah. But I think I just have asked like the Holy Spirit for an opportunity, and I took it scared. Yeah. So I didn't take it. I didn't do it comfortable. And I think that a lot of these things, like, that's very personal to me. I think some people could relate to that though. Yeah. But it's going to look different.
For sure. I think and it takes, emotional energy. It takes, there's just a lot there.
So I call it like mental gymnastics. Like, you have to,
and it's almost easier in the moment to just, I was having this conversation with my brother-in-law when I was out of state for the holiday, and I was like, I think my relationships are kind of based on object permanence. Like, if I don't see you, you don't exist in a certain way. Like, I don't do good. I keep texting or calling, email. I don't communicate with family that well. And so it is weird. So for me to even think like, okay, well, if my relationship is already maybe tense with someone, to go that extra mile to try to mend it, it just, a lot of times it's like I just don't have the energy to do it, and it doesn't. I'm not sure I see the benefit of it, right? Like in not saying I'm right, but I'm just saying in that moment, like sometimes you just weigh the odds, and
Yeah.
you're kind of like I don't know what the value is here, and am I just going to invite more chaos into my life where it's like it feels the easy and peaceful right now.
Yeah.
I definitely think, to your point, Jess, there's a spiritual side of it. I don't want to over spiritualize it, or I'm always not wanting to give the enemy more credit than he deserves. But I mean, his MO is to kill, steal, and destroy, and especially relationships. And I think the family is just one of the vehicles that God chose to use to model what his relationship to us is, what it means to be in relationship, even imagery like someone who was not a part of a family that's been adopted into a family. A lot of that stuff is just the vehicle, the picture that God gives us for what it looks like to be in a relationship with him, father, son, that kind of like he is our father, and some of that imagery. And so I think obviously there's an enemy that doesn't want that to exist, who wants to do everything he can to create dissension and to keep people ununified. And ultimately that's his goal. And so it takes a lot of humility and willingness to fight against some of those things, and to often, use one of the phrases I try to think of when I'm parenting around certain topics is I'm not fighting with my kids, I'm fighting for my kids. In things that they want to do and I say no to, but every other parent says yes to, and reminding myself, okay, this is a fight for my kids, not with my kids. And oftentimes when it comes to those kind of conversations, I think with family, siblings, those types of things, is realizing, hey, this is a fight not with them, but for them. And they might not be on the same page at the same time, but I think inviting prayer inside of those things, it takes a great amount of humility. And I think owning, your part in it, and I think that takes humility of, hey, I should have had this conversation sooner, or I let this rift go on further, or whatever that looks like. And so I think in those kind of familial situations, those are some of the things around some of those cycles, that can happen. And humility in those conversations is so big, especially if you are the victim, or you have a lot of ability to do that. Maybe you're the child and going to parent, like those are scary conversations, because it seems like you're essentially telling them they're wrong, especially if you're saying, I want to correct something that you handed down to me. That's a scary thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I would be that brave. I mean, even, like Eric, you said mending. I feel like I just went with like who was left and like who I want to move forward with, and say like I identify this. So that could look like talking to whoever's left and like, can we change this? And like we may not be able to change this or mend it. I don't even know if it needs to be, if it's even this conversation is like focusing on correcting, but it's like, who am I moving forward with? And like, are we moving forward together? And I think even if you aren't married, if it's not part of your family, like I even have shared with one of my best friends, like, hey, like this is a trigger for me. Like if there's conflict, like let's work through it. Like I'm committed to this. Like I want to know. And this is how I want to move forward. And I think those things, like your resolve is what helps you establish patterns and be hopeful that you won't repeat those same things because you're making different choices. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. What are some of the ways that we can look at breaking these generational cycles in a healthy way, a way that's respectful to family, it's God honoring?
Yeah, I think step one, if you haven't done it, is just look at the patterns. I mean, don't just make it up. You can just start blaming that this came out of nowhere, but a lot of times it's realizing that there's a pattern, doing a genogram or something like that, and realizing, hey, how deep this pattern goes. Because I think if you don't realize, if you go into it just thinking, yeah, I can wake up tomorrow and I can solve this, and it's been going on for 4 generations inside of your family, good luck, right? And so I think one is just realizing it, being honest about that, and maybe doing some kind of, you can go look it up on the internet, how to even do a genogram around certain things. Maybe it's health, maybe that's what you need to look at, or it's communication, it's money, whatever. You can do it in so many different ways, but I think that's the first thing is, okay, realizing that there's a problem, kind of going to the doctor saying, hey, I'm having some symptoms. I need to look deeper into where these symptoms are coming from, because if you're overcorrecting something that doesn't need to be corrected, then you're creating a whole new problem. And so I think just knowing where those patterns come from, I think is step one, at least for me. Mm-hmm. And then I think obviously from the pastoral lens, I'd say, hey, start praying about those types of things. Hey, what are some of the steps I should take? But I'm sure, Jess, you have some practical, psychological and counseling types of things that
I think
we should pursue too.
This is one of the scariest things that when I'm talking to people, like, this is a terrifying thing to address. Like, it's one of the things that you're most tired of happening and the scariest thing to address. And so I think going from 0 to 100 is very difficult. Some people can go like all in, but that for most people is very overwhelming. So I always ask people, like, how can you move the needle 1%? Like, of maybe it is noticing. I think one thing, especially when we're overcorrecting, so it's like, can you take a breath and count to 5? Like, that is so simple, and it sounds so cheesy, but it is very difficult to do in a moment. But those are the moments where it's like, can you create some space between your reaction and your feeling, which I would say is potentially a trigger. Like, can we put some space between it? And then I think ask for help. These are really isolating situations, especially if it's gone on in a family pattern and it's hurt you. And so these are things that also, like, skilled professionals are trained and they are privileged to walk through these types of things with you. I always say, like, with people, thank you for letting me, like, bear witness to what you're going through, because that's really what we're doing. And as pastors too, like, that's what we're doing. We're witnessing what people are trying to do the work to fix. And so,
yeah, I would say even
a couple things.
Even not if you don't have access or resources to seek out professional help and you're just trying to even get something started, just be brave enough to have a small conversation with one person, just talk it through. I think that's the thing that I'm always surprised by when it's easier to ignore those things. But then when you do build up the courage to have that kind of somewhat confrontational conversation, that can lead to much more flourishing within that relationship and even mending and healing relationships, or helping one another better understand each other.
Or even talking to somebody and asking, is this normal?
Yeah.
Like, hey, to a friend, that's totally on the outside of this, but hey, this is happening because to you it is normal.
Yeah.
Or maybe you talk to them like, yeah, that's normal. Those things happen in family. It doesn't mean it's okay, but like sometimes I think you just feel like you're on an island. So having that one conversation, I think is a big deal, Eric, with somebody you trust and you want to be vulnerable with. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot to take away from this subject, and it's, if nothing else, it's good for just kind of, some self-evaluation and just look at what you're doing in your life, what are those habits, and how can you better yourself? How can you connect with your community better? How can you connect with God better, more intentionally? Maybe some of these habits are keeping that relationship with God stagnant. I know sometimes that's the thing that comes up a lot of times in believers' walk. They go, why am I not hearing from God? Why am I not experiencing God the way that others are? And it's like, maybe it is something to do with this, where you haven't addressed some of these habits that you're a part of, and they could be hindering your relationship in a lot of different ways. But yeah, Jess, thanks for bringing this conversation to the table. I think it was really interesting. It's something I think about all the time. I just probably don't always have the words for it, but being able to put the words to it is really helpful. If you have any other questions or concerns, you want to reach out to us, you can always do that on social media at CCCOMA Podcast on Instagram or TikTok, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.